Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good evening. Welcome to the August 23rd board meeting. We are in session now. Attendance, I am going to call roll for everybody. If you could just announce if you're here, please.
Before we begin, I need to ask a question that I think would be very helpful for all of us and for the community also. It is my understanding, since there is no longer an emergency declaration in place in the state of Pennsylvania, that we are under the guidance that's been in place for years, that our meetings need to be held live and in person. And that without that emergency declaration in place, there's no policy in place that we've adopted and voted on as a majority of the board to move meetings to a virtual format. The virtual format,
I think Mr.
the
Audi
virtual format is only to be used for a individual or individuals that cannot attend the meeting live, according to the Pennsylvania State School Board Association guidance on meetings. So I'd like to understand how this meeting is legitimate in a virtual format when we are supposed to meet live. That's the state guidance and law, is my understanding.
I'll be happy to address that for you. I don't believe that your interpretation is correct. The guidance about having to have a quorum in person, physically in person, is for townships and municipalities. It's not in the school code. The school code.
It's on the Pennsylvania State School Board Association.
They don't make the laws. I've checked with them, and I believe, and I'm giving you my legal opinion, that we're not violating any laws whatsoever under these circumstances.
I wish that I agreed with that, but based upon what I've read, the guidance that I've received from state representatives, they have a difference of opinion, and I'm very concerned about the legitimacy of this meeting tonight.
The guidance that you have received from state representatives does not address the school code. It does address municipalities and townships. I've checked it out. I've looked at the guidance by the state representatives, and frankly, unfortunately, it's incorrect. It does not address the school code. And there's a significant difference between what the law says with municipalities and first-class townships than what the school code says. The school code doesn't.
I totally agree with you, John.
Okay.
But the documents on the State School Board Association website are pretty clear, and I'm not sure how they're open to interpretation.
Can we move forward with, is everyone in agreement with moving forward with Mr. Audi's assessment?
I am not.
I am.
I am.
Okay. We're going to move forward with roll call then, please. Mr. Dimeki?
Here.
Ms. Gangware?
Here.
Ms. Gaiman?
Here.
Mr. Lysette?
Here.
Mrs. Nord?
Here.
Mrs. Parsons?
Here.
Dr. Serene?
Here.
Dr. Smith?
Present.
And Anita Desai, I'm here. So we are going to, if you would please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. And unmuting the board members, if you could unmute while we say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of America,
and
to the republic which stands
one
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we are going to move to visitor comments. Before we get that, I just want to say just one bit of housekeeping. Anyone who signed up through the email prior to 7:30, their comments are in for prior to to be speaking before our meeting at the first comment section. Anyone signing in after 7:30 will be for the later one after we go through our agenda. And just to let everyone know, we do have a very packed agenda and a lot of visitor comments for this evening. So, please know that if board members are looking at other screens, I personally have two screens going. So if I'm not looking right at the camera, it does not mean I'm not paying attention. And if board members might have to get up to do, whatever they need to do for a minute or two, because after a long day of working and then now coming to this meeting. So just know that people are paying attention, but most of us have multiple screens so that we can have our agenda on one and the Zoom on the other. So I did, want to put that out there. So moving on to visitor comments. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Comments are to provide input to the board on items that are before us to vote. Speakers must be district residents and sign in via the email. Because this is a business meeting, there will not be a response period from the superintendent of board meetings. Because we do have a huge amount of people that are signed in to speak, we will be sticking very strictly to the 3-minute limit. Okay, and so I'm going to turn this over, I think, to Mr. Roof, and might be announcing the names.
First up is Steve Denton. I will be on mute. I'll be hitting your unmute button. Mr. Denton, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me speak. So good evening, everybody. Just want to let people know that my hope for my son Noah, a senior at Southern Lehigh, and all the other students is that he has a normal year where he is in school learning and around his friends and other students. In addition, I hope he has a normal basketball season and gets to do all the activities seniors do during their senior year. My concern has to do with not wearing masks. And I know that's up for discussion tonight. My concern with not wearing masks is that he is exposed to other students who test positive, and then he has to quarantine at home and misses school and activities. And this happens multiple times throughout the year, not just to Noah, to many students, creating an abnormal school year. The only logical solution is to have students wear masks to avoid a repeat of last year. I've spent the last 16 months working in my office around other colleagues, and because we wore masks, none of us had to quarantine at home because of exposure to another colleague. I do not enjoy wearing a mask, and I look forward to the day when we all do not need to wear one. Having said that, wearing a mask has allowed me some sense of normalcy by being able to go to work. I want that same normalcy for Noah and all other Southern Lehigh students. Wearing a mask is a very small sacrifice to accomplish some sense of normalcy. I do hope the school follows the same approach that my employer, Lehigh Valley Health Network, follows regarding exposure to someone who tests positive for COVID. If I was around a colleague who tested positive and I was wearing a mask, my exposure was considered low risk and I was allowed to remain at work as long as I did not have symptoms. This approach worked well for our healthcare organization and can also work well for Southern Lehigh. The last thing before I end is I'd like to thank all teachers and staff who continue to focus on educating our children during this relentlessly challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I did not have Mr. Audi announce our executive session prior to our meeting. If you don't mind doing that, Mr. Audi.
Yes, there was an executive session from 7 o'clock to 7:30 in which personnel and other matters were addressed.
Thank you. Sorry. Moving on. Go ahead.
Okay, up next is Dr. Frank Dangelo. Mr. D'Angelo or Dr. D'Angelo, you should be able to speak.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I would prefer not to be addressing this Board of Education, the administrators and educators in attendance, and my fellow community members about recent actions and meetings. But remaining silent is no longer an option for me, given the lack of decency and common courtesy displayed by certain speakers at the June 28th and August 9th Board of Education meetings. It is imperative that our level of discourse needs to be held at a higher standard. And each of us in this community bears the responsibility to raise that bar. If what was stated by numerous speakers is indeed true, that we want what's best for the students of this district, the starting line for this improvement is the mirror and the person that we see when we look in that mirror. As a 37-year retired educator, it is clear that we each can best teach through modeling what is proper behavior and eliminating what is improper behavior. And as an adult member of this community, it is evident the past two meetings woefully failed at this mantra. Here are the knowns we're all dealing with. People in this district have significantly different views of various district issues. 2, a school board has been placed to make these decisions. 3, some will embrace those decisions. 4, others will strongly disagree with those decisions. 5, when the decisions are made, abiding by them in a democratic society is the role of good citizenry. 6, as adults, if we want what is best for our children, we will need to use these outcomes as opportunities to teach life lessons. Face it, not everyone is going to get what they want each and every time they ask for it. The sooner we teach that lesson to our future leaders, the better future leaders they become. I thank this board for allowing greater participation through the virtual setting in which this meeting is being conducted. As a person with an underlying health issue in a climate of rising COVID rates, having the opportunity to safely participate in such vital discussions is appreciated. I encourage this board and district leadership to continue to analyze curricular content void of rhetoric and to follow the science as it applies to health and well-being matters of students and staff. I conclude by noting that I can decide to drive 100 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone, but there are potential negative consequences to that decision. Those outcomes can apply not just to me, but to others. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next one, please.
Next is Laura Hayne. Apologize. You should now be disabled. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Good evening. Thank you. Dear members of the Southern Lehigh School Board, my name is Laura Hayne. I'm the parent of 2 children in your district. I'm a pediatric clinical pharmacist, and my focus areas are the pediatric and neonatal ICU, as well as the children's ER. I am in support of mandatory masking to protect our most vulnerable patients, specifically those who are unable to be vaccinated, such as children less than 12 years old. Pediatric vaccine. Companies are expected to submit data on the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccine in children in September, and we will then await the results of the FDA review. We are almost there. Let's continue our efforts to stay safe in the interim. COVID-19 cases are on the rise in our community based on the most recent CDC data. Our level of community transmission is currently defined as high. We must continue to take precautions, especially in our unvaccinated students. The Delta variant has proven to be significantly more contagious, as many colleagues will point out. By reducing transmission of COVID-19 through mandatory masking, we can reduce the incidence of rare but significant complications of COVID in children, such as multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or MIS-C. This is an inflammatory reaction in the body. It can occur a few weeks after a COVID infection. The inflammation can affect the heart, the blood vessels, and other organs. It can make some children very, very ill, requiring critical care. As a parent of 2 children less than 12, it is a very scary thing to me. As of July 2021, the CDC has reported over 4,000 cases of MIS-C and 37 deaths related to MIS-C. Again, we must continue to take precautions such as masking, especially in students who are too young to be vaccinated. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this information.
Thank you.
Next up, will be Maria Alt. Hold on, sorry. You should be able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First, I would like to say that this school board meeting being moved to all virtual is unjustifiable and not right. There are clearly other options, such as having this meeting via in-person and Zoom, which would have been inclusive for all. Second, both of my children, now 11th grade and 8th grade, are affected physically, emotionally, psychologically, and socially by wearing a mask all day in school. Wearing the mask makes breathing for my children difficult, causes lightheadedness, dizziness, and headaches. The difficulty breathing in the mask also affects their learning. They are both breathing in the fibers from the surgical mask, which could be extremely dangerous. For example, my eldest daughter, during her history class, block 2, she blew her nose and there were black fibers from the black surgical mask. Wearing a mask causes anxiety in both of my children. My youngest never had an issue with anxiety, but her wearing a mask gives her anxiety. For my eldest daughter, who struggles with anxiety, wearing a mask increases her anxiety, causing her to sometimes have mini panic attacks because she feels like she can't breathe. Wearing the mask is also causing some depression as they feel isolated and unable to express themselves freely. Both of my daughters are very sociable and love to smile. However, no one in school can see their facial expressions. There are misunderstandings among the students. For example, my eldest daughter told me that one day she thought her friend was giving her dirty looks and a friend texting her, letting her know that she was actually smiling at her. Both of my daughters said that sometimes it is difficult understanding what the teachers and students in class are saying through the mask, therefore not getting the full instruction. In addition, my youngest daughter wears glasses and her glasses are always fogging up, and thus she is unable to see, so she misses some teaching and learning instruction. Both of my children wore masks at school during the pandemic and still got sick a few times with COVID-like symptoms and flu-like symptoms. As physically healthy children, they recovered as always, and more importantly, they did not pass their sickness on to their very immune-compromised mother, me. I have not gotten sick at all during this pandemic, and despite my children being sick a few times, I've never ever made them wear a mask at home. There are other preventative ways we use to prevent me from getting sick, and it obviously worked. My kids never have to worry about passing on something to mommy that may kill her. Kids should never ever have to think that way. Due to the ineffectiveness of mask wearing in children, coupled with the multiple negative effects of children wearing masks, such as the ones I mentioned in this speech, my children will not be wearing a mask at school all day. It is child abuse and it affects their learning capabilities. All of the children have missed out on so much education already. Children are at minuscule risk of getting COVID, and if they do get COVID, they are in most cases asymptomatic or have mild symptoms. Please do not mandate masks. Mandating is not right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Next is Stephanie Tomlinson. You should be able to talk. You will just have to unmute yourself. You'll have to unmute. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, double mute. Hi, my name is Stephanie Tomlinson. I'm the mother of 2 children who are attending kindergarten and also 6th grade at JPLS. This is my first time speaking to the school board, although I've been listening all 2020 and 2021. I've never felt more compelled to speak to a meeting as I can no longer stand silent. I'm speaking tonight in regards to making masks optional and being up to the discretion of the family and the child or the parent. I've organized an optional mask petition on change.org in which our community as of this evening has received over 850 signatures from members of the community, students, and parents. I've appointed the board as the decision makers on this petition, and I will also send that list of the community members for visibility and for the ability to you also read the comments. I'm very much a data-driven person who works around analytics, and I am very disappointed to hear in the last meeting we had over 3 doctors speak, yet no actual data or facts, instead of just anecdotal and emotional pleas. Again, I was disappointed to review the COVID presentation for this evening to see that there was no really data around pediatric impact, or most importantly, the children that we're all here speaking about. Last week, all the superintendents met with the St. Luke's Medical Group, yet we have no new data in regards to Lehigh County specific data, especially around the children. Again, at the school board meeting, we look at the incident rates, but we don't look at the death rates. I know that was one of the requests of the school board to see what the death rates were for this past week or the past few weeks. We look at the number of rising cases. We are high the last 2 months at 145, but that only accounts for 1% of our population. It's very important when we look at all of this data. What is the percentage of the population? What is the percentage available dates? All we see is numbers, but not the actual physical impact of our community as a whole. With the data presented, I also just want to have an anecdotal comment around my children. They've, over the last year, experienced negative effects around wearing masks, having anxiety, having a hard time breathing, a change in disposition. Although I don't disagree with masks, I do believe that our children are not wearing masks properly. They're not being changed throughout the day, and they're becoming havings of bacteria and fungi. And if we're going to mandate this for our children, it is important that we are also making sure it's remaining safe. And I have not yet heard any guidelines around that or any guidance around that. So I just ask that you take into account everybody's opinions around what has actually happened to our children, because while some children are okay with wearing masks, some are not, and it's important for this board to be inclusive of all children in this county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Next is Roanoke Modi. You should be able to talk. You will have to unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity for giving me the chance to talk. And I also wanted to thank all the teachers and everybody that's been working through this whole pandemic. So my name is Ronak. I'm a father of 3 kids. I also happen to be a physician at our local hospitals. And our kids are 4, 6, and we also have a 3-month-old. And I just wanted to keep it very simple, keep it to 4 points. Why I think and we think, my wife and I, that masking is very important in the upcoming school year. So first of all, we know that the mask works because there's a lot of data behind it, but I also wanted to give some personal information. So my wife and I, we have been working with a lot of patients that have had COVID and interact with them. My wife was pregnant during the pandemic, and before the vaccine, the masks were the only resources that we had to keep her family and her safe. And it worked really well. Now we have a 3-month-old that we want to keep safe. So, and the masking has also helped out with this. We have a 4- and 6-year-old that can't unfortunately get vaccinated because there isn't any data out there yet. But again, they've been very safe with keeping their mask on. They keep their mask on even throughout the school, and fortunately haven't had any issues doing that, and haven't had any of the complications of depression or anything along those lines. So I'm very happy that they've tolerated it pretty well. And I agree. I think the mask sucks, and I wish we could live in a world where we could get rid of them, but I think this is not the time. The goal right now is to really prevent the spread, and the vaccine and the mask are our best bet right now. We don't know what the immunity is going to happen with the vaccine that we're given. We don't have the data on that. So, and they say it may wane. We don't have the data, maybe 6 to 8 months. So this is not the right time to kind of cut back on things, especially at the height of the pandemic. In terms of the data, kids do get sick, and I agree, not that many kids get sick, but COVID is associated with 1% hospitalization. That's 2 to 3 times more than influenza. 5 to 6% of the kids go on and have chronic symptoms. These symptoms can be fatigue, tiredness, depression. Delta virus is associated with 2 times as much admissions, compared to the other viruses. And then, we've also mentioned all the inflammatory conditions. 4,000 kids have gone, and these are really bad things that can happen to kids. So great, not that many kids do get sick, but I don't want my kids being one of those kids that do get sick. So let's keep our kids engaged in school, keep them active, keep them social. And I think the mask is the best way to do it at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next person.
Next is Glenn Laverty. You should be able to talk. You'll just have to unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Hello. I wish to address the board this evening to speak in favor of revising our health and safety plan to align with the current CDC guidelines. While we had all hoped to begin this school year as normal, we cannot ignore the reality of the COVID-19 Delta variant and the risks it poses for our children. The Delta variant is more than twice as contagious as the original strain and can be transmitted by those who are vaccinated. While many people in Lehigh County have been vaccinated and are likely protected from serious complications, we all know that children under the age of 12 are not yet eligible for the vaccine and remain at risk. Based on the number of daily cases, our county now has a high risk rating for those who are unvaccinated, and the trend is heading in the wrong direction. In keeping with CDC guidelines, I'm in favor of masking for all students, teachers, and staff, regardless of vaccination status. While it is clear there are many opinions on this topic, we cannot ignore the strong evidence that masks limit the spread of COVID-19 when utilized as part of a layered protection strategy. The decision to mask is not a matter of individual protection, but about what each of us can do to protect one another. I also ask that our health and safety plan specifically address the increased risk to students during lunch when masking is not possible. Per CDC recommendations, we should again make use of additional spaces outside the cafeteria to maximize social distancing during lunch. After the last 18 months, we need to prioritize in-person learning for all students. We can only achieve this goal by keeping our children safe from infection. No one benefits if we need to repeatedly shut down our schools because we are unwilling to put in place proven mitigation strategies. This is a matter of public health. Decisions should not be made based on the opinions of impassioned community members, not based on what we've read online, and not based on the results of a single isolated study. Decisions should be made based on repeatable, verified data and expert advice. I am asking the board to approve a health and safety plan that fully adopts the current CDC guidelines in conjunction with guidance from our local health experts. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Up next is Neil Fitzpatrick. You should be able to talk. You'll have to unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Thank you. All right, so thanks for the opportunity to talk with you guys. I'm Neil Fitzpatrick. I'm one of the pulmonologists at St. Luke's. I'm also a dad to 4 kids in the Southern Lehigh School District, and believe me that nobody wants their kids back in school more successfully than I do. For the past year and a half, though, I've been dealing with the acute and the long-term effects of this pandemic in the hospital and in my clinic. And I truly cannot believe that we continue to have discussions on what we know to be the simplest, least invasive, least harmful, and most effective ways of reducing transmission of this virus, proven again and again in multiple trials. We know, and as Dr. Modi said previously, that as of right now with the Delta variant, we're seeing a large rise in pediatric cases, and approximately 1% of kids who are testing positive now are requiring to be hospitalized. And it's easy to discuss the mortality rates of these kids and write them off as insignificant, but we're all parents within this district, and any child of ours who might get lost to this disease, when the transmission of the illness is potentially reducible, is unequivocally unacceptable. Our children are not perfect at wearing masks, I agree, and we don't need them to be. Each breath covered by a mask is greatly diminished in its ability to transmit any respiratory virus. We do not require perfection out of these kids. And more personally, directly in my practice, things go well beyond the mortality caused by this virus. I care for previously healthy marathon runners who now struggle to make it through their first mile, and the development of non-lethal COVID complications that we need to be thinking about for our kids, including things like, most commonly we see new onset asthma and the development of blood clots, can't be forgotten either. The numbers that are kind of most popular with this virus do anything but tell the whole story of what we're ending up dealing with on the back end. I want to strongly urge the board to consider the mask mandate that's been adopted by several of our surrounding school systems as a not perfect, but best available option for how we can help protect our kids and by extension, the people with whom they come into contact. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Next person up is Charissa Dimeki. I have a Jeff, so I'm gonna. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The prior gentleman said there were a bunch of trials that say that they've proven that masks are effective, but I've just recently found an article that says, do masks reduce COVID transmission in children? Believe it or not, we could find only a single retrospective study on the question and its results were inconclusive. So I'm not sure which trials he's talking about, but from what I've read, there's not a lot of conclusive studies that say that it is effective. As a parent of 2 school-age children under 10, I think a strong case can be made that kids should not have to wear a mask, especially for up to eight hours a day. I'll give you my personal experience with my child and masks. My child was in-person kindergarten last year for 2.5 hours from February to May. We had a handful of cloth masks for him. One of the masks was a white cotton mask. Every day after school, I would wash them. The white cloth mask, though, told me the most. Here's something I learned. My 5-year-old is a mouth breather when he wears a mask. His mask was wet nearly every day after only 2.5 hours of PM kindergarten and was filthy. I threw away the cloth mask before it could start developing mold, which it would. But the other masks were much harder to tell if it was happening. A large majority of the children I saw at Liberty Bell Elementary wore cloth masks as well. If we do go back to masks, I definitely won't be buying cloth anymore. I'll be wearing the disposable so I don't risk it. Here are some startling facts from Dr. Marty Makari, who recently wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal this August. Generally, we know that kids are inefficient transmitters. We have no sufficient data to conclude that masks do not harm our kids, especially small kids. In fact, there is $42 billion in the NIH annual budget, and none has gone to something so crucial. Those who have myopia can have difficulty seeing because of mask fogs or glasses. Masks can cause severe acne and other skin problems. Masks distract some children from learning. By increasing airway resistance during exhalation, masks can lead to increased levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. Masks can be vectors for infection if they become moist or are used for too long. If you look up a study from the EPA on the effectiveness of face masks in April, there is a very good visual listing the different types of masks. Most single layer cloth masks and the procedure masks with the ear loops and no modifications only have an FFE, which is a fitted filtration efficiency, or how well a material filters out particles, of somewhere between 26 and 39%. This study looked to be only on adults. I think it only makes sense to make masks optional. I realize COVID numbers are up, but I believe the risk outweighs the benefits to children wearing masks, to children not wearing masks 6 to 8 hours a day. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Daria Stewart. You should be able to speak. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I think we all can agree that we want our children in school in person full time. I want to share 2 conversations I had with friends last week. On Thursday, I spoke with my best friend who has elementary age children in a state that requires masks in school. They started the school year full-time in person with universal masking. 5 days into the school year, a classmate tested positive. That student and one other student that sat next to him on the bus have to quarantine. No one else was considered a close contact. The following morning, I got a call from another friend. She lives in a different state whose elementary aged daughter attends a school that is mask optional. Her daughter wears a mask. She is the only child that wears a mask in her class. Also, 5 days into the school year, she was called to pick up her child early from school because a classmate tested positive for COVID and the entire class has to quarantine. Actually, on that day, 3 classes were put on quarantine. Her daughter wore a mask, yet now she has to quarantine for 10 days, assuming she tests negative, longer if she actually contracted COVID. Her daughter was devastated, in full tears, and so was mom, because her daughter has to miss her best friend's birthday party. She has to miss her weekend activities. And now my friend and her husband have to pivot and figure out childcare. I know these 2 examples don't represent a statistically significant peer-reviewed study, but it is significant to both families. Mask optional will not keep kids in school. The layered mitigation efforts of last year were so successful. Please keep them in place, including requiring masks. Please, let's keep them in school and out of quarantine. Thank you. Since I have a few minutes, I just want to also thank you for your service and reading and responding to the no doubt zillion of emails you've received regarding this topic. I have read several of the email exchanges, and it was refreshing hearing civil conversations being had. I hope we as a community can come together and move forward together because our children deserve it. Lastly, I kind of want to address the comments of people that have just made some comments, and I want to figure out how we can work together, because let's figure out how to have kids masked without having glasses fogged. Let's figure out maybe some sort of fundraising activity to get quality masks on all these kids that are not breathing them in and, you know, having them blow out black stuff from their nose. Let's try and do some sort of like mask break outside, more outdoor activities. Let's just work together, because we are a community that really deserves this. We don't deserve fighting. We don't deserve it. Our children don't deserve it. We could come together and figure out a solution to this, because it's not a win or lose thing. We just have to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Next is Michelle Shepard. Okay, I have 2 people with the name Michelle as their Zoom name, so I'm going to attempt to go through. Is this the Michelle that is requesting?
Okay, yep, this is Michelle Shepard. Thank you. So a very sincere thank you to the board for all of your work during this past year and a half. I'm not sure about most others at this meeting, but in the past year, I have not attained my doctorate in medicine, epidemiology, immunology, nor any other related field that may give me the authority to advise policy regarding protecting our children from COVID. Because of this, I rely on the thousands of those who have earned such authority, namely those in the American Medical Association, the AAP, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, and the CDC, to name a few. The Pennsylvania Departments of both Health and Education have made it clear that they also support the guidelines from these institutions that suggest mandated universal K-12 masking. If the vast majority of experts in medicine tell us that we should employ something as simple as masking, in addition to other well-known mitigation procedures to help our children stay in school and lessen the spread of COVID, why are we debating this? We can't allow our kids to be used as political pawns. I know you, the board, have received many, many signatures across 2 petitions with opposing views on this mandate. Let's just say hypothetically, 1,000 are against masking and 500 are for it. Do we say, well, public opinion rules, let's give the kids the option to go maskless? No, because we rely on expertise. Let's not undervalue expertise. Now, I'm proud to have signed the petition to keep our kids masked until they can all be vaccinated and the metrics show there is no longer a need to be masked. But your decision shouldn't be based on a number of signatures one way or the other. It should be based on the guidance of those who have earned the right to provide that guidance. So the fact that we're even having this discussion tonight is kind of disheartening. The approved Southern Lehigh Health and Safety Plan currently states that it will make decisions regarding masking based on guidance from the CDC and community health partners. Those positions are clear. We all know the old adage, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. As a community, let's be part of the solution. Let's do our part to keep our numbers down and keep our kids in school. Let's not be Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, or Arkansas, who are all seeing school closures and thousands of children and staff quarantined due to lack of mask mandates. Please heed the expert advice and make a commitment to protect our children and the Southern Lehigh community. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Next person.
Okay, the next person is Dr. Connie Draco. You should be permitted to talk.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Dr. Connie Draco. I'm the mother of 4 Southern Lehigh students with a son who recently graduated and 3 sons in middle school and high school. I'm a board certified pediatrician and neonatologist who holds a master's degree in healthcare quality and safety and who is currently enrolled in a master's program for public health. I've led the COVID response effort at my private practice across 16 neonatal intensive care units in 7 states, including Texas and Georgia, and I co-chair the COVID task force at my church. As many people have mentioned tonight, our common goal really is to keep students in school and keep our student athletes playing sports. To accomplish this, we need 2 things. We need teachers to teach and students to learn and play. Masking of students will mitigate risk to teachers so they can continue teaching. Masking of students will mitigate risk to other students so they can continue attending school and playing sports. There are over 70 peer review articles, and I'm happy to send those citations to anybody if you're interested in reading the research that prove that masks are effective. Teachers and students risk being absent for an extended period of time if they contract COVID or if they have a significant exposure and need to quarantine. Universal masking, as mentioned before, will allow children and teachers to return to the classroom if someone in the class tested positive. Optional masking would require quarantine for those without a mask. What does masking optional look like? In Tampa, Florida, this past week, a single school district had 8,000 students and 300 teachers out of school due to illness or quarantine. The state of Mississippi had 20,000 students out. Please do not let our school district be the next tragic news story. The Delta variant has more than double the infection rate compared to earlier strains, and pediatric cases of COVID are increasing. According to a report by the American Academy of Pediatrics, over 180,000 children tested COVID positive between August 12th and August 19th, 2021, representing 22.4% of the positive COVID cases. And this number is up from 121,000 and 18% of the positive cases the week before. Pennsylvania ranks 4th in this country in cumulative number of childhood cases behind California, Florida, and Illinois. We did so well with masking and social distancing last year and kept COVID cases in check. Why would we remove the safeguard when the Delta variant is easier to transmit and it's impacting our children more often? Please, let's follow the advice of the pediatric experts at the AAP and mask our students. We put helmets on our football players so they can safely play. We have our student drivers wear seatbelts so they can safely drive. We need to put masks on our students so they and their teachers can safely attend school. Thank you, board, for all of your service and making your masking decision based on science and not emotion and politics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is John Schubert. You should be able to speak. You will have to unmute yourself.
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is John Schubert. By way of introduction, I've lived in the Southern Lehigh School District for 41 years when I bought my forever home here, and I served on the school board for 12 of these years. I ask that the board safeguard the community's health by requiring all masks all the time. Don't wait for the statisticians to figure out how often a vaccinated person can transmit the disease. That knowledge will lag reality by days, weeks, months, whatever. And don't wait for the anti-vax crowd to be 100% honest about their vaccination status. The situation could become quite dire soon as the infection rate rises even more. And the trend is ominous. The 7-day average of new cases in Lehigh County is up 91% in the last 2 weeks. The 7-day average of hospitalization is up 72% in the last 2 weeks. Think of the slope of that trend line. Don't wait until the infection rate has climbed even more to say, oh, whoops, we should have had a universal mask rule earlier. The patriotic thing to do is to wear a mask to help this community and this country become healthy. We shouldn't need a rule to make that happen, but unfortunately we do. Please make that rule. When the infections and hospitalizations plummet to near zero and stay there for a month, you can talk about relaxing the rule. And I would like to say to the people who are anti-mask, who are on this call, this meeting, it's not that tough, really. It's not that tough. When my kids were in elementary school, they came home one day and said, our friends can't believe we don't have cable TV. Well, yeah. Toughen up your kids. I toughened up my kids by saying no cable TV. You can toughen up yours by saying wear a mask, wash your masks, and don't believe the nonsense. Thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Person is Russell Schnitzer. You should be able to speak. You'll just have to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Russell Schnitzer, and I don't care. I don't care what medical professionals and experts say about masking. I don't care if my children wear masks to school. I don't care if my children get sick with COVID. I don't care if my children get other children, teachers, administrators sick. I don't care if my children get my friends and relatives sick. I don't care if my children get my neighbors and communities sick. I don't care if my children get so sick that they require hospitalization. I don't care if my children need to be put in a medically induced coma so they could go on a ventilator. I don't care if they lie in isolation for a month between this world and the next. I don't care if I get a chance to hug my children again. I don't care, but I hope you do. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, up next is Jill Hedges. Jill Hedges. I do not have anyone with the name Jill Hedges as their Zoom name. Jill, if you could re-email the account what your Zoom login is, and we will get you up right after we get that. The next person would be Danielle Kurzai. You should be able to speak if you want.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. We have groups of highly qualified people who are studying the rapid changes that COVID has brought us. Why wouldn't we follow the recommendations of the CDC and American Academy of Pediatrics? Other school districts have set boundary conditions based on the 7-day new case average, based on data. When you get in a car and tell your child to wear a seatbelt, you don't explain all of the possible consequences. You don't give them a choice, you are the adult. And yes, it's a law, but I would hope at this point, even if it wasn't, that wouldn't change your approach. Parents can tell their kids to wear a mask, but then we place the burden on children for a risk they may not understand. Our kids play and socialize together now. Let's not create two groups at school. Let's let kids be kids. At least they can get along. Another aspect to consider is economic. Many of our companies have required masks to keep our businesses running. We don't have businesses without healthy workers. In my experience, this has worked across the country at my company. We did not have in-work transmission. When I went to work, I wore a mask to protect my team at work and my family at home. Regardless of the outcome tonight, quarantines will still be required. But the reality is that many parents are not in a position to miss work if their child has a cold or close contact. Even pre-pandemic, some parents sent their kids to school sick. I expect not because they wanted to, but because they didn't feel they had a choice. In order to keep our kids in school and our parents able to work, we need to come together as a community and follow the experts' advice on masks in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Next is Dr. Kenneth Andreiko. You should be able to unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Dear board and community members, my name is Dr. Kenneth Andreiko, and I'm an anesthesiologist and proud father of 4 Southern Lehigh students. The decisions you make now will have profound effects on the students and community for years to come. Please take a minute and where we were months. I hope we can say that you made the tough decision to manipulate and kept our children safely in school. Safe and prevents the spread and transmission of COVID-19. Masking is safe in children. Controlled studies from the Journal of the American Medical Association and scientific reports show that inhaled oxygen and carbon dioxide levels are normal in children wearing masks. Dr. Angela Rasmussen, a virologist from Columbia University, has reported that in children, there are no ill effects on immunity or the immune system from masks. Masking is effective in preventing COVID-19 transmission in schools and in the community. A recent study out of Duke University evaluated transmission in North Carolina schools. The study showed that masking is the single most effective means in preventing COVID-19 transmission. The report recommends that children who are exposed to COVID-19 while masked do not need to quarantine. Just last week, a landmark report from Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh evaluated community COVID-19 transmission within the United States. The study showed masking as one of the key measures in preventing illness and spread. It goes on to say that preventative measures are even more effective if implemented before overwhelming community transmission rates occur. This simple intervention of masking will keep our schools open. School board and community members, when you come into one of our hospitals, you trust me and my colleagues to make critical care and life-saving treatment decisions. We are now asking you to trust our guidance on mandatory masking for the safety and health of our teachers and children. I would like you to remember 3 things. Masking is safe and effective in children. There are 16 pediatric intensive care unit beds in the Lehigh Valley. Let's keep our children in school and out of those intensive care beds. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
We're going to go back to Jill Hedges. Thank you. So we'll get you. You should be able to unmute and go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not here to spew out statistics to support my view that masks should stay optional, because by this point, we all know that we can find facts to support either side of this debate. The biggest issue we have right now is that we have become 2 sides that are just trying to convince the other side that we are the correct ones. Let's keep the focus on the fact that we are all trying to do what is best for the safety of our children. The problem with requiring masks is that there is nothing we can shove up our kids' noses to test for the status of their mental health. The only way I can think to quantify that is the fact that counseling centers are inundated with an excessive amount of young people needing their services. I can say that most places I called had a 9-month wait period for an appointment. We made contact with a school counselor in the meantime, and to be frank, they were not equipped to handle the struggles we were dealing with. This is not okay. In my opinion, the mask optional decision is actually a compromise that should appease both sides, but apparently it's not. My question to you is, what other options did the board look at? I saw a community member suggest in another compromise in one of these social media forums. How about the kids wear masks in the halls, but can remove them at their desks? If that doesn't sound like a reasonable compromise, I really hope that none of the rallying people for masks are going to any restaurants, concerts, or sporting events with their children. And please don't tell me that your kids are actually playing the sports unmasked. Hypocrisy is one of my biggest pet peeves. My kids were fully virtual last year, so I'm not sure how many mask breaks were given and what the parameters were for those breaks. I don't think it's fair that the parents that don't want their kids masked are the only ones that seem to have to compromise our beliefs. At the last meeting and this one, it was said by members of our community we're fearful to speak up. We also heard from a few physicians telling us why masks should be worn. I spoke with a physician in the community that is fearful of losing their job if they speak about their opposing view on the mask mandate. Fear is everywhere, but you cannot let it control your decisions. I know that voicing my opinion now for the second time has potential backlash for me professionally, but my need to protect my children is stronger. I will not stay quiet, and I will continue to fight for my kids. As I stated in one of my emails to you, your job as our school board is to not make medical decisions for us as parents, nor is it your job to enforce anyone else's medical opinions on us. We can all assume that you will be changing the masking decision tonight, and I don't envy your position as decision makers, but I do feel like you're making the wrong choice by forcing masks on our children. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you. Next person.
Person is Kristen Brook. You should be able to speak. You'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So before I share my thoughts on COVID protocols, I want to thank everyone in the district for all they've done this past year and a half to try to do what's in the best interest of our children. The teachers, the coaches, administration, and the school board. None of you signed up for this, and I know that you're all doing your best in an impossible situation, and I and so many others thank you for that. So most of you on the board know that I'm the parent of 2 secondary students in the district, as well as a teacher in another district. And I honestly don't know how we are even here at this moment debating how to open the schools. Cases are much higher than they were this time last year, but we know so much more now. Evidence shows that mitigation strategies like vaccines, distancing, and masking help to prevent the spread of the virus. If we truly want our kids in school and to stay in school, then we should follow the guidance of the experts, including many who have spoken tonight. Both of my kids are vaccinated, as are my husband and I, so I'm not as concerned as I once was about our family contracting the virus, and we are living our lives pretty normally. Although, of course, I don't want us to get COVID or inadvertently pass it on to someone else if we happen to get a breakthrough case, which is why now that Lehigh County is back at a high transmission level, we wear masks when we are in an indoor public space, and it's really not that big of a deal. But what I am concerned about, particularly as an educator, is what is happening in schools around the country that are not requiring universal masking. Some schools have shut down within days. Sports teams have been put in quarantine and not been able to compete despite weeks of practice. Kids have even had classmates and teachers get sick, and some have even died of COVID. Hospital ICUs are overrun in communities, making medical care for non-COVID cases like strokes and heart attacks scarce. And when I look at that data and I see that masks can help prevent these situations, then why is this even a question? My kids will be much more impacted by their sports teams being shut down or their grandfather being denied care after a stroke or repeated quarantines and school shutdowns than wearing a piece of fabric over their face. And I get it. I do not want to teach in a mask this year, but I do want to be in the building with my students. My kids want to be in school with their friends, and universal masking is how we do it. Special consideration also needs to be taken at lunch when kids need to remove their masks. Last year, the high school allowed students to eat lunch outside, and that should be implemented again, and perhaps in other schools as well. So I ask you, the board, to please implement universal masking in all the buildings, as well as distancing and other evidence-based solutions to keep our kids in school as much as possible this year and to keep our community safe. I know that's your goal too. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Next person is Dr. Christopher Rocher. You should be able to speak and unmute.
Okay, testing.
You're good.
Okay, so good evening. My name's Christopher Rocher. I'm the father of 2 school district students and an anesthesiologist at St. Luke's University Health Network. I serve as the co-chair of the Network Patient Safety and Monitoring Committee, the Department of Anesthesiology's Patient Safety Officer, and have instituted numerous quality improvement projects that have drawn national attention for improving patient safety. This evening, I'm speaking to you as a parent who happens to be a physician. Yesterday, I submitted to the board a letter urging a data-driven and objective approach to masking policy, which was signed by 101 medical professionals, 71 of whom were physicians like me, all of whom were parents of students in our district. The purpose of that letter was to provide support for the board's stated position in its safety plan, namely to use data and guidance by experts to maximize in-person learning opportunities for our students this year. Regarding universal masking to reduce COVID-19, numerous investigators have published studies in peer-reviewed journals and have made same or similar conclusions. Masking is likely to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Because COVID-19 is primarily unknowingly spread by asymptomatic individuals, the benefit of masking is only achieved when it's done universally by reducing the likelihood that such individuals infect others without knowing it. When COVID-19 transmission levels are high like they are now, an optional masking mandate will be ineffective for the goal of maximizing in-person learning. The corollary to a data-driven approach is that when community transmission levels are low, masking should not be needed. Indeed, if today's meeting were held on July 1st, when Lehigh County was reporting just 4.2 cases per 100,000 residents, I would be arguing the opposite in this meeting, that masks were not needed. Addressing the potential harms from masks, a minority of reports have suggested negative effects from masking, like elevated carbon dioxide or increased acne. These papers are generally of lower quality, have not been replicated, or have not been published in peer-reviewed forums like newspapers, magazines, or blog posts. One study published in the journal JAMA Peds suggesting harmfully elevated CO2 levels was so flawed that the authors subsequently were forced to retract it. Many healthcare workers have worn masks, multiple masks, continuously for hours on end, or have sprinted up stairwells or down hallways fully masked, running to resuscitate COVID-19 patients without any ill effects of low oxygen or high carbon dioxide. I should note, however, as a parent, that I empathize with the troublesome anecdotal stories of masking that other parents have shared here tonight. Finally, it's important to consider the benefits of masking as the school year begins in the context of the looming approval of vaccine for the 5 through 11 aged population. We have to give those children a chance for vaccination. By using a universal mask mandate, we give them that chance.
Thank you.
Next is Joanna Gorbuski. Do not have anyone who's currently logged in with that name. So Joanna, if you can re-email the account with what your username is, if it's a phone number or something along those lines. We will move on to Kate Lamberton. You should be able to speak and unmute.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am a parent of 2 children in the district, an aunt to a third, and a biologist, a mother, all of those things. I wanted to, there's really not much more for me to say, in all honesty, that hasn't been said already. I really appreciate all of the data-driven information that so many obviously passionate, educated people have given here regarding universal masking. I am in favor of it until children are able to be vaccinated. My 2 children are at the elementary level. And I know the Pfizer vaccine just got its full accreditation from the FDA today. I hope, beyond hope, that the pediatric vaccine will be available soon. And I just think that until that vaccine is available, until children are able to be vaccinated, we have to continue with that Swiss cheese model of prevention, of every possible mitigation factor that we have, as others have spoken to so eloquently already. I do apologize for not having prepared notes. I don't see any other way around it. To not wear a mask is not a choice just for you or just for your child or your family. It impacts the entire community. It impacts the entire classroom. The best way forward is to protect everyone, keep this disease out of our schools, out of our children as much as we can with every measure that we have in front of us. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you from the board. Thank you to the community for these impassioned responses. Thank you for taking the time to hear us all tonight. I do not envy you the decision that you have to make. I know that there will not be one decision that will make every single community member happy, but as others have pointed out, we are a community and we do have to come together, and we trust that you will use the evidence, the data that are present, and make the best choices possible for the health of our students, the health of our teachers, our staff, our community, and everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Next person.
Next is William Lopes. You should be able to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm a parent of a Liberty Bell student. As of August 5th, the Center for Disease Control's recommendation is for universal indoor masking for all individuals in schools, regardless of their vaccination status. The American Academy of Pediatrics also makes similar recommendations. And the board is going to hear, or has heard, and will likely continue to hear from a lot of parents who are both for and against masking. I myself am not a medical professional, and while we have heard from a few tonight, I assume the majority of parents, administrators, and policymakers in the district are not medical professionals either. As such, we are not qualified to discount the guidance from the nation and the region's top medical professionals, including those from the CDC, AAP, and those who have spoken tonight. I think we can all agree that students benefit from in-person learning. Safe in-person learning should be the goal of everyone involved in the district, and a COVID safety plan that does not follow the CDC guidance should require a significant amount of evidence that proves it is safe and the right move. I urge the school board to follow the recommendations from the CDC and the AAP and adopt universal masking so that students can return to school as safely as possible. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to Joanna Grabowski. I believe this is your account. You can unmute. Check one more thing. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm going to work on finding that one. I'm going to move on to Patricia Heishi Siegfried. You should be able to speak and unmute yourself, Patricia.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Patricia. I'm a Hopewell parent, a community volunteer, a college professor, and a healthcare professional. This past year and a half has been very difficult for all of us. And I can't imagine the challenge that the school board faced when trying to balance the safety of our children and your staff with the educational needs of the students. You can't make everyone happy. And so in the end, no one is really happy. But I appreciate all that you did to try to do what you thought was right. You don't need me to tell you that 2020 was the worst year many of us have ever seen, and none of us want to repeat it. The best we could get for the first half of the school year was 2 days of in-person learning. I can only speak for myself when I say I felt my child was falling way behind, and it made me feel like a failure as a parent. I couldn't teach my child the way he needed me to when I was working full time. We all hoped this would have been over by now, but unfortunately it's not. It's getting worse. The cases are rising as quickly as November of 2020, and many of us saw the horrors of last winter that we don't want to relive. We have a duty to protect the people of our community who are unable to protect themselves, the people with compromised immune systems, frontline workers who put their lives at risk while trying to save people who fell victim to COVID-19, and the children who are not eligible to get vaccinated. I'm hoping you will do the right thing, protect our children, protect our community, and prevent having to go back to virtual or hybrid learning. And with this, I'm asking you to please require masking in our schools. Many businesses in our area, all of our healthcare centers, and our local university have all gone back to requiring masking indoors, vaccinated or not. Children, especially young ones, follow the example that's shown by the adults in the room as well as their peers. And if you allow vaccinated people to go unmasked or make it optional for people, then these young children will do the same. This is a dynamic situation which requires dynamic decision-making. We can always change it later, but please at least start out the school year requiring masks for all students, staff, and visitors. I want to thank you all to the board for your hard work and especially your patience. We saw a lot of aggression and anger in the prior two board meetings, and I'm very thankful that this meeting has been a lot more civil. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I appreciate your time, and I greatly appreciate this online forum that allowed me to safely contribute to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Person is Amity Cassidy. You should be able to unmute.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm actually going to speak first on a topic that's not necessarily being voted on tonight, but I was unable to speak 2 weeks ago. I grew up here and graduated from Southern Lehigh, and I'm now raising 3 children here. The comments I've heard regarding the proposed DEI training for staff have shocked and saddened me. The events of the past year have opened my eyes to the reality that living in America as a white person is very different from living in America as a Black person. We are a nation built on diversity. Equity means equal. Despite what some people may think, things have not been equal for all Americans. I've been trying to read and listen and learn about events in our history that I was never taught about in school. And time again, I see that the African American community has had many aspects of life stacked against them, things that I, as a white person, never think about. The phrase walk a mile in someone else's shoes comes to mind. I want my children to look at other people's experiences with compassion and know that while they may not personally be responsible for our nation's history with slavery and the racism that has remained, I want their eyes to be open to the fact that it is a part of how our country was built, and that they can be allies, not adversaries, by speaking up and using their privilege for good. CRT is not taught below the graduate school level, so that was never the intent. Opening staff and students' eyes to the experiences of others was. I hope some form of DEI training will be implemented at Southern Lehigh in the near future. It occurred to me that the issues of DEI training and masks are intertwined. Masks are not about taking something away from your children. They are an opportunity for all children, even those unvaccinated and immunocompromised, to go to school in person 5 days a week. While the original strain of COVID may not have affected children as severely, the Delta variant continues to infect and hospitalize more and more children every day. I want to protect your children, and I hope you'd want to protect mine. That's how a community is supposed to work. It's not every man, woman, and child for themselves. We are here to take care of each other. This has nothing to do with politics. If we want 5-day in-person school to continue, 3 proven mitigation strategies need to be in place, at least until our area is out of substantial/high rate of transmission category. Distancing as much as possible, ventilation, and masks are these 3 mitigation strategies. I read a quote recently that sums up how I'm trying to live my life and how I'm encouraging my children to try and live theirs. Privilege says, I could help, but I don't need to. Courage says, I will help. You need me. Love says, I must help. We need each other. Thank you for your time this evening and for your continued service to our community.
Thank you.
Up next is Nithin Bombaretti. Nithin, you should be able to unmute.
Oh, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, then I'll start. Hello, my name is Nitin Bomaretti, and I am a junior at the Southern Lehigh High School. Now, the issue of masking has been one that has seen much debate over the past year and a half. Now, I personally feel that there's no reason why a mask mandate for all students and staff if they are able to wear one, cannot be approved and enforced. The only reasons why others have said that masking should not be implemented is that it's the parents' right to choose what is best for their kids. And this is right in most cases. But the issue of coronavirus and how it is being spread throughout the nation is a community issue as it affects not only the child and the family, but all others in the district. Additionally, many of my friends in school have told me that they faced increased mental health issues and anxiety when cases spread throughout the district, not because of wearing masks. Also, over the past week, the daily average number of cases were almost 150,000, and the number of deaths was above 1,000 in the United States. Now, this number is higher than the number of cases and deaths last summer. And what's worse is that now we have multiple vaccines. These numbers show that the vaccines have not decreased the number of cases nor their fatality rate of the virus. This is because COVID vaccines that are in circulation right now are not meant for the new Delta variant. The virus has evolved to continue to spread regardless of vaccination status. The vaccine will only make the symptoms milder in certain cases, but it will not prevent you or others from getting infected with COVID-19. Now, the CDC has even stated, in quote, given what we know about the Delta variant, vaccine effectiveness, and current vaccine coverage, layered prevention strategies such as wearing masks are needed to reduce the transmission of this variant. The school district's current health and safety plan specifically states that the Southern Lehigh School District will follow CDC guidance. This means that not enforcing a mask mandate will go against the district's own policy, which is already in place and not being debated upon. Also, if we do see a rise in cases, then we will have to close the school down and move to remote learning for periods of time. This is inevitable in a non-masked environment. For example, in our band, and this non-masked environment is everywhere in our school. For example, in our band practice that was held just last Thursday, only 5 or 6 kids out of 100 wore any form of facial covering. By approving a mask mandate, we introduce a minor inconvenience that is just putting some cloth up to your face in order to make sure that in-person learning stays an option for a majority of the school year. School districts all around us have enforced mask mandates. It is time that we follow their lead and approve this mask mandate for the 2021-2022 school year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Up next is Justin Pa.C.S. You should be able to speak and unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Justin Pa.C.S. I spoke 2 weeks ago at the last board meeting. I am a parent of 3 children who've either gone through or are going through the Southern Lehigh school system, and I'm also the chair of medicine for the St. Luke's Health Network. As a way of an update for the board, when I spoke or presented last week, I had mentioned that the number of COVID admissions in the St. Luke's system at that time were around 30 patients plus or minus was the number we were seeing on an inpatient basis across the network, whereas 4 weeks prior to that, it was around 5 patients across the network. As of today, the number in the network was 89. So the activity in the community is certainly up. There's been a lot of healthcare providers on this call who are a lot smarter than I am, who are giving you studies about why we should be masking in school. And for me, it really comes down to it's the best option to keep our kids in school for as long as possible. In terms of, a lot of people brought up the psychological issues with their children wearing masks and the stress it causes them. And I agree, and certainly don't want to minimize that because, wearing a mask all day is hard on anyone, whether you're a school-age kid or you're an adult. It's hard on me when I do it. I don't like it, and I need mask breaks myself. But I would say last year when our kids were hybrid, I think that was profoundly worse than wearing a mask. I saw my child do gym class lying on the couch. So, in order to keep our kids in school as much as possible and to get a full education, I suggest we follow the guidelines from every society out there, from all the experts out there, and that we mask our kids. And I just want to add my thanks to the school board for doing a great job in putting this all together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go back to Joanna Grabowski. I believe this is your account. You would have to unmute.
89.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hold on, let me try. Okay. Can you hear me now? I
Yes.
hope. No?
Yes.
Hello?
Yep, we can
We
hear you.
can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. Okay. All right. So, dear school board, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for serving as a volunteer on our school board during the most difficult and tumultuous time. You have endured unspeakable abusive behavior from members of our community that no school board member should need to endure. You have a thankless job, and I would like to publicly thank each and every one of you. We wear hats and sunglasses to protect our eyes and faces from the sun. We wear sunblock to protect us from getting sunburn and skin cancer. We wear seatbelts to protect us from getting injured in a car. We wear hats, gloves, and coats to keep us from getting frostbite. We wear helmets for sports to protect our brain. Why is it so controversial to wear a mask to help protect us from getting COVID? It just makes no sense to me. I am writing to you today to ask, when you vote on universal masking, to use science as your guide. Do not use emotion, opinion, or political affiliation. I would not seek professional advice of a healthcare worker to fix my car, build my house, do my taxes, or be my attorney. In this same vein, I would ask that you follow the recommendations of every medical society we have. The benefit of masking for COVID control is due to a combination of reducing emissions or source control when people cough, sneeze, sing, talk, or breathe, as well as to reduce inhalation of droplets by the wearer. This is especially important during the asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic time. This is clearly discussed on the CDC's website. Currently, children under the age of 12 do not even have the option of getting vaccinated if their parents choose. Whether we like it or not, this virus is going to keep traveling and mutating at every opportunity unless we unite to defeat it. Pretending that this virus is or did not exist is not an option. We are just not there yet. Dr. Poland of the Mayo Clinic in the Grand Rounds on Friday, August 20th, said that this pandemic course will be determined by two factors: viral behavior and human behavior. No one measure is sufficient. We need layered mitigation. We need to vaccinate, mask, socially distance when possible. I urge you to search for the Mayo Clinic's Grand Rounds on August 2021. It is excellent and explains what is happening that even a non-clinician can understand. This is not an opinion. This is not political. This is not emotional. This is science. We are fighting a war against an invisible enemy. The healthcare workers are the boots on the ground on the front line. We need the whole army to help so we can win this war. Our collective goal is the same: to keep our kids in school. Universal masking accomplishes by avoiding quarantine when exposed to a COVID positive person, as well as school shutdown by case overload. This is about people's lives here. This is not about dress code. We need to teach our children about compassion and the greater good collectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Next is Mr. Bill Young. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to kind of switch gears, just like the prior caller, and just talk about the DEI CRT conversation from the last month's meeting, if I could. Last month, I guess you guys decided, in my opinion, rightfully so, to kind of scrap the DEI program that was done by the prior staff and kind of start fresh with the new superintendent. So clearly that had so many issues, so I applaud your efforts to move on from this. My concerns are that it took this long to figure out that there were some issues with that program. And only when the parents fought for over a year was it determined that we were going to move on from that. At last month's meeting, a few board members admitted they didn't maybe follow as closely or maybe weren't paying attention as much as they should have regarding the program and the development of it. So while I appreciate you speaking up, I'm very concerned as to how the new DEI programs will come into being. To be clear, I understand DEI and CRT are two different things. However, we're seeing across the country schools and businesses using CRT theories and applying them to DEI programs. That's my concern. I'm confident the school district is not going to come out and say or implement a CRT program. However, to be honest, I am not confident that some theories might not find their way into new programs. The reason why I have hesitancy of this is for the August 12th email that was sent out by Mr. Musaline and Mr. Ruff. In this email, there was an update on the DEI initiative. In this section, I quote, was written, DEI is not CRT. We do not teach CRT, and we are not planning to teach CRT. We really do not understand what CRT is because we have no need to understand it. It doesn't pertain to us, our school system, our students, or our teachers. No CRT work will pertain to us in the future. To be honest, I find this very concerning. The community is voicing their concern about CRT, and in one breath, we've just been told, hey, don't worry, there's no place in our school for this, and it won't be in our schools. On the other hand, you're telling us that you don't even know what it is, and you don't understand it, and you don't have a need to understand it. If you don't understand something, how can you tell me it won't find its way into our schools now or in the future? How is this reassuring to the community who don't want this in our schools when the superintendent and assistant superintendent's emails are telling us that we don't even know what it is, and we don't need to? My challenge to the current board, future board members, and the new superintendent is that you do need to understand it, and you do need to become educated on it. If you don't, how can you really in good faith tell us as parents that it will not be part of our schools? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Anthony Murphy. You can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to address the board this evening. I join with those who support the implementation of a mask mandate at the start of the coming school year. While I have heard encouraging support for the concept of improved indoor ventilation throughout our district, children under the age of 12 cannot yet be vaccinated, as we've heard multiple times this evening. We cannot therefore rely solely on vaccination at this time for the safety and welfare of our community's children. Instead, we must rely on other mitigation efforts in a layered approach. Mask use is a simple, proven, effective shield that we have in our power to guard our children, and we should do so. With that said, to the doctors, public health professionals, and teachers who are listening tonight, I would like to thank you, very sincerely so, for the work that you continue to do in our community. And thank you for your comments here tonight. We all owe you a very deep debt of gratitude that history will remember forever. It is my hope that we who are served by your efforts can extend even the simplest of efforts in helping you help us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will Mr. Douglas Malatish, if you could email the account to clarify your Zoom name. There is a Doug and a Douglas, and I just would like to make sure I'm with the right person. Up next is Mike Twardowski. You should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to say that the ends justifies the means. At least I believe that's a motto that 7 of our school board members embrace. Last meeting, you were asked for transparency, open dialogue, inclusion. Your response was this Zoom meeting that you knew was going to set off those people that asked for it and was in direct conflict with transparency and open dialogue. But clearly the ends justified the means. Your actions over the last 18 months, I would have thought were misguided and thoughtless, but I think it's actually much worse. Let me recap. You guys on this board had a hand in hiring our previous superintendent and her working agenda, Kathleen Avision. Superintendent who had a disdain for the community that she was supposed to serve, who in writing called us racists, who also chose not to disclose her conflict of interest with the company that she hired to do DEI, the DEI survey. You excluded over half the community from being part of that survey. So, my question is, was the board just clueless, or worse, were you in agreement with her and that agenda? Again, the ends justifies the means to you guys. The community that this board serves was requested documents through the Freedom of Information Act. Yet those documents, after multiple requests, were never turned over. Why were you hiding this information? You needed the state of Pennsylvania to tell you to be in accordance with the law and turn it over. The ends justify the means to you guys. As a member of the community, I'm going to repeat the request. Was it our legal counsel who asked and advised you not to give those documents? If so, I want you to vote tonight for his dismissal. If the board members ignored his legal counsel and advice, then I request those board members resign tonight from the board. Okay? The last board meeting, instead of apologies and a promise for a fresh start, many of you promised us more of the same DEI stuff. Worse yet, our good doctor, Mrs. Serene, in particular, referred to us as almost scary, violent racists who were feared by our neighbors and afraid to come to a board meeting. Not a single one of you members stepped up and corrected her or stopped her from that implication. I truly believe that some of you maybe need to move to my neighborhood, because you'll see people that actually care about their neighbors, elderly, sick, that are out cutting their grass, mowing their lawns. Never once did I see any of those people ask about religion, race, creed, or their political beliefs, okay? Again, the nonsense you're spreading and the things you're saying to create division in this community are a way for you to have the ends justify the means. For those of you that talked about masks, you may be right as far as medically or otherwise, but remember, it's not legal to force people, and you're not raising everyone's children.
Thank you. Next person.
Person would be Douglas Malisish. So you should be able to unmute.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Douglas Malich, and I live at 5507 Nina Circle. My family had COVID, and we have the antibodies to prove it. I would like to start by objecting to the venue of this meeting, as Zoom meetings and the like are being used more and more by elected officials under the shroud of COVID as a way to avoid public scrutiny and confrontation on controversial topics. We are taxpayers, and we deserve and expect to look you in the face when addressing the board. You will not hide from us from behind a screen, and you will ultimately be held accountable. There is no standing emergency order banning such meetings in person in the state, and we will be pursuing potential violations of the Sunshine Law in absence of such order. Second, to get right to the point, you will not put a mask on my child. We are not asking for your permission or consent. We are simply telling you how it is. How this occurs is entirely up to you. You are not doctors. Our children are not your patients, and this is not a hospital. Our children are not sick until proven healthy. They will not learn to live in fear and that the air is toxic or to cover their faces. They will also learn to think for themselves, make their own decisions, and follow data and actual science, which is beyond clear that COVID not only poses an extremely minimal risk to children, but there is also no data that supports an absurd theory that they are vectors of a disease with a 99% survival rate, or that cloth masks would do anything even if they were. Let me be perfectly clear. There are no studies that conclusively demonstrate that kids wearing masks in schools has any effect on their morbidity or mortality or on hospitalizations and death rates in the communities around them. This was included in a commission and release study by the CDC as recent of 3 months ago. There are no longer adults in the room, and humanity is devolving into a state of perpetual, irrational fear. It stops now, right here. For 18 months, we have played by the rules, and in my case, have even enforced the rules, which has spanned 3 years of our children's school. We did our part and watched as geriatric bureaucrats imploded small businesses and sucked the lifeblood out of our economy. We did our part as the same people have mentioned nothing about developing healthy lifestyles of going to the gym or eating a balanced diet, despite 80% of COVID hospitalizations being obese. And now 18 months later, some of you believe it is wise to turn your attention toward our children, as if a simple piece of cloth will magically save those of you who believe you need saving. Despite the average age of someone dying with COVID being higher than the life expectancy in our country, despite the fact that 96% of every COVID death has an average 4 comorbidities, according to the CDC, despite the fact that at-risk adults have been vaccinated, it's shameful, embarrassing, immoral, and unscientific, and it ends now. In 18 months, 400 children nationally have died from COVID. The number in Pennsylvania, 0. I repeat, 0 children have died with COVID in Pennsylvania. By comparison, 14 million children are clinically obese, 12,000 die annually, 1,000 die from drowning, 8,000 experience non-fatal drowning, and over 600 die in car accidents, not to mention the hundreds that die from the seasonal flu. Thank you for your time. I didn't get through all of it. I didn't get through all.
Okay, up next is Noel Martins. Noel, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you to the school board for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Noel Martins. I'm a gastroenterologist at St. Luke's and a parent of children who recently completed the 5th grade, 3rd grade, and kindergarten in our school district. I am speaking in support of beginning the school year with a masking mandate. I ask the board to follow the guidance of the American Academy of Pediatrics and St. Luke's, who are recommending this. We know vaccines are very effective and very safe. I want to highlight 3 groups of people who have not yet received the full benefit of the vaccine. The first group is those who are unable to receive the vaccine due to allergy to vaccines or vaccine components. I work with a nurse who is unable to receive the vaccine for this reason. She is also pregnant and she is concerned about her health and her pregnancy if she gets COVID. The second group is those with compromised immune systems, as they may have a weakened response to the vaccine. As a gastroenterologist, I take care of patients with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, many of whom are taking medications that suppress their immune system. I'm concerned about my patients with a compromised immune system and all patients that are immunosuppressed. The CDC is also concerned about these patients, and that's why they are now eligible for the 3rd dose of the COVID vaccine, but many of them haven't received it yet. The third group is children under age 12. We've heard a lot today about the Delta variant and how it seems to cause more common and more severe disease in children. 1% of children with Delta variant get hospitalized, more than 400 deaths across our country, and others with long-term sequelae. I asked the board to begin the school year with a masking mandate. This will help keep COVID rates low in our community and protect those who can't get the vaccine, those with compromised immune systems, and children under 12 years old. Masks help protect the most vulnerable in our community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
There is a Jessica LaPauling. If you could just email the account to clarify your Zoom username. Thank you. Next up is Stephen Baki. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First off, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. I'll keep it brief. Pretty much all of my predecessors were very well prepared and articulate, and I probably won't be either one of those. I do fully support the masking. We have a child who's about to go into kindergarten this year. My wife is a pulmonary physician at Lehigh Valley, and she has seen firsthand from day one the results of what this COVID virus can do to people when things go wrong, and it's gone wrong a lot. I have to agree with the people that don't like the masks. I personally get extremely bothered by it in about 15-20 minutes, and it's difficult. It can be done, but it's difficult. I understand. Essentially, again, I do support the mask mandate. I'm giving away my child to you, which is actually pretty tough. She's the most important thing we have. I am trusting you to educate her, to guide her, and most of all, to protect her. The best way you can do that is by enforcing a mask mandate as the authorities prescribe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next would be Dr. Rochelle Steiner-Friel. You should be able to speak when unmuted.
Hi, good evening. Last year around this time, I spoke to the board regarding the 6 feet distancing requirement that kept schools from opening in person 5 days a week. I cited the evidence from our European countries who use 1 meter distance with success in their schools. Last year, I was up against the same argument regarding the CDC and the US-based medical societies and local medical guidance which was all in agreement that 6 feet distancing was absolutely required to open schools. I argued that the risk to children from school closures would be worse than the risk of moving the distance to 3 feet. According to the board, their decision was supposed to have saved lives. Today, the guidance agrees that 3 feet distancing is sufficient. Did their decision save lives or just keep our children out of school? I would like to say that today, not every civilized nation agrees with the position taken by the CDC, et cetera, regarding masks. The majority of European children will not be mandated to wear masks this school year. This includes England, where the Delta variant is the dominant variant and cases are still elevated. Most European countries never required masks for children under 12, and Sweden never required masks in either primary or secondary schools. I think most people in the community ask the same question about COVID mitigation measures that patients ask regarding any healthcare intervention. Is it safe? Is it effective? Is it necessary? And how long do I have to continue this mitigation? The Bucks County Health Department understands this and takes a very different stance than is being recommended by many here and by the CDC. Here's what these qualified professionals making decisions in a neighboring county say. For the start of the school year, we recommend that at a minimum, schools should adopt a mask optional policy. Moving forward, the BCHD only recommends the use of targeted temporary mitigation, where school districts consider making mitigation decisions in consultation with BCHD based on their local data and for specific situations. Targeted means it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and instead is in response to individual situation and needs. Mitigation measures should be crafted in order not to affect healthy, non-exposed individuals when possible. Temporary means that all mitigation be time limited to meet the needs of the specific issue at hand rather than imposed without a defined end. They go on to say public health authorities strive to limit their response to the least restrictive action for the least period of time in order to achieve the desired outcomes for public health. In addition, I would like to suggest that it's time to adopt different requirements for isolation and quarantine, such as is in the Bucks County Health Department, where they say that for schools, fully asymptomatic individuals with a known non-ongoing, i.e. not in their household exposure to COVID-19 may continue in school normally unless any symptoms developed, in which case they should either remain home or be evaluated by a school nurse if at school. I guess that concludes my time. If I had more, I would have a lot more data and things to say, but hopefully this is helpful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a Michael Malik. If you could just clarify that your Zoom username for us as well. Up next, Migdalia Resto. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dali Resto. I am a neonatal pediatrician here in the Lehigh Valley. And with my school teacher husband, I'm raising a son who is currently at the high school. I, like everyone else, am more than tired of wearing masks and wish wholeheartedly that we could do away with them altogether. I also sympathize with those whose children have struggled with wearing masks. However, the recent rise in positive cases in so many areas of the country, including both our Lehigh Valley community and in our younger populations, does not support foregoing masks as a safe strategy. You have all heard the data and the science, whether you believe it or not, which shows that masks work to not only decrease the likelihood of infections, but as a consequence of that, they can also help decrease the loss of days in school and possibly work for parents when exposures occur. Nothing is ever 100%, but every little bit helps. In my professional capacity, I have had to see pregnant women who have been severely and adversely affected by this virus, and in some cases having to be delivered prematurely, and it has been heart-wrenching to see. On the personal side, I am very fortunate that everyone in my household has been able to be vaccinated. I am concerned that our kids are going back to school as immunity may be waning, potentially exposing people like my 80-year-old mother who lives with us, something that could be preventable by simply wearing a mask, which my family is now going back to as the cases rise. And I admit we were not wearing them for a long period this summer. As a mother, I am also very concerned that my son did not fare as well as some in the online academic realm. And my hope is that he can be physically in school 5 days a week to give him the best chance at being academically successful. If wearing masks can help do this more safely, then the benefits are obvious and worth the mask inconvenience. I urge the board to decide for universal masking for at least of the school year as being recommended by the AAP and the CDC. I thank you all for the opportunity to speak, and good night.
Thank you.
Up next will be Melissa Woodring. You should be able to speak and unmute.
Hi, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Melissa Woodring. I'm a lifelong resident of Southern Lehigh High School with 2 sons currently enrolled in the district. I'm embarrassed to admit that I've only ever attended one other school board meeting, the one held 2 weeks ago. I grew up in a real estate family, married into one as well, and Southern Lehigh has always been viewed as a great district to raise our kids. I proudly would tell clients that they would love living here. I'm honestly not sure I feel that way right now. At the last meeting, those opposing CRT initiatives were accused of trying to bully and silence the other side with our vocal opposition. Well, I can tell you, everyone feels bullied and silenced. Numerous people have approached me to discuss the hot topics in our district, most of them saying that they were afraid to speak up because of fear of being attacked by the other side. I personally feel silenced tonight by the board's decision to have the meeting by Zoom instead of in person. I thank Dr. Lysette for opening the meeting as he did, and I too would like to understand the rationale behind this decision. What potential safety issues were you trying to solve? It couldn't be the lack of mask wearing by people attending the meeting, since the district felt comfortable having the athletic meeting in person earlier this evening. There were over 75 people in the auditorium with only a handful of people wearing masks. So please tell me the rationale behind this decision. Why couldn't this meeting be in person? I was so tempted to not even speak up tonight, given the agenda and the new masking proposal set forth in it. I feel like your minds are already made up, but I was afraid my silence would instead be interpreted as acceptance of masking. So please count me as a vote for someone who wants masks optional. I implore you to please allow me to make the decision whether I want masks for my children. I'm not going to pretend I'm a doctor or a scientist. I've read the studies. You've read the studies too. We all have access to the same COVID data. No matter how you personally feel about COVID, you can't ignore the statistics. Children are largely unaffected. So why are we acting like that's not the case? We were compliant last year. My sons wore masks, but now it's a year later and nothing has changed. We need to start living again without fear. COVID sadly seems here to stay. I don't believe it's your job or even your right to make medical decisions on behalf of me and my family. If you do choose to require masks, which I think you've already decided, please consider making common sense decisions. While masking was required in Pennsylvania, we were allowed to remove masks when seated at a table in a restaurant. Why can't students remove their masks when seated in class? Our kids need some normalcy. They need to go to football games, sit with friends at lunch, see their friends' smiles again. If there are parents who are afraid, maybe make accommodations for them, offer them alternate seating at lunch, for example. If you decide to require masks, I implore you to set the criteria tonight to what has to happen before we go back to mask optional. Please let parents decide what's best for our kids. Finally, I did have a lot to say on the CRT-DI initiatives, but given the focus of this meeting is around masking, I'll reserve my comments until a future meeting. But I do challenge you to research the difference between equity and equality. Equity is not as innocuous as it seems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, if Jess Lapalling, if you could email the account to verify what your Zoom name is, and Michael Malik as well, just because there's a number of people with those same names. Up next would be Nicole Dolan. You should be able to unzoom or unmute, excuse me.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Nicole Dolan. I'm a community member with 2 children in the district. First, I want to share that I appreciate that you held this meeting virtually. We clearly have a wide range of views across Southern Lehigh. Having difficulties attending a board meeting in person isn't limited to one subset of our community. Whether the views expressed are similar to mine or polar opposite, I am so glad to hear these voices. Pardon. Second, I was glad to see the health and safety plan on tonight's agenda. So thank you for doing what you have consistently done through these challenging times, which is assessing new data and new recommendations and then making new decisions. I don't envy your decision. You clearly have a community that is divided on this topic. Tonight's speakers have shown that as well. I'm sure 2 different petitions have been brought to your attention and they are essentially even. One thing I truly believe though, is that we all want our students in person for as many days as possible. At times like this, expert advice and recommendations are more essential than ever. I trust that you will give that expert advice its due weight. You also have the benefit of being able to effectively so-called look into the future by seeing data from other areas of the country that have had the Delta variant for longer than we have. The community has heard that several board members are convinced that vaccinations and ventilation are effective mitigation strategies. I hope those same 6 students are vaccinated. They have not had the option. They will not have the option until well into the school year based on current projections. Please don't leave them behind. If you believe vaccination is an important mitigation strategy and the option for it does not exist for a subset of the students, then I trust you will agree with the experts on why having universal masking in our schools at this time is so important. I also trust you will keep in mind that wearing a mask does not simply protect the wearer. Masking protects those around the wearer, including students who require a mask exemption, should the wearer unknowingly be a carrier. One part in the different health and safety plan options wasn't completely clear to me. So tonight, when the board members are discussing them, I hope the following will be made clear for the benefit of the public and the board members as they prepare to vote. The last item in the guiding metric for each of the tiers is related to the vaccination rates of, quote, community, student, and staff. Below age groups based on their access to the vaccine. When discussing the health and safety plan options, I hope you will confirm that this means until a vaccine is approved for children under 12, then the K through 6 students are considered to be in tier 3 due to having low community student and staff vaccination rates 0 to 39%. I look forward to the day that we do not need a mask mandate at school. I look forward to hearing that we did such a good job at suppressing the spread of the Delta variant that as soon as we have high vaccination rates in the K through 6 students, we can revisit our health and safety plan and no longer have universal masking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next will be Michelle Stanton. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts. And I'm going to keep my comments brief because I am not an expert in this area. And for that reason, I hope that the board, as most of you are not, will listen to the science and the experts, many of them who have spoke very well with data tonight, have yet to hear somebody with those types of qualifications advocating for optional masking. The goal, I think, for all of us is to get our kids into school full time. And with what we're dealing with, this year is not the same as last year. Things have changed. We're dealing with a different variant. Looking at the schools in the South that have gone back and within a few days or weeks have had to go to virtual learning has been, because they don't have mask mandates, is showing that we should take the steps to protect our kids and keep them in school in the beginning. Hopefully we don't have to do this for long and we can, move on. None of us want to be wearing masks. And I asked my daughter, I see masks as an insurance policy for us keeping our kids in school. So I have a 13-year-old daughter in 8th grade. And I was like, look, she's vaccinated. She doesn't want to wear a mask. But I said, are you willing to wear a mask so you can be in school? Or would you prefer to be virtual? She emphatically is willing to wear a mask. She wants to be in school with her friends. She wants to play volleyball. She wants to be able to get together with kids. She had to quarantine about 3 times last year. And we don't want to see that happen again. So in an effort to keep our kids in school, I ask that you as board members listen to the comments of the experts, the people with the degrees, the healthcare workers who are on the front lines. This is not just about one individual, one kid. It's about protecting the community. And I understand, and I hope that we can come together and maybe come up with some resources, some ways to accommodate if there are kids who are having real problems with the masks. Let's work on that. Let's address it. One of the things I'm thinking is sending my kid with multiple disposable masks instead of the cloth mask, if that's more comfortable for her. I think there are ways that we can do this to accommodate the needs. But the goal is let's keep our kids in school, and I see masking as the way to do that. Thank you, and I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Up next is Dr. Christopher Wayock. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good evening. My name is Christopher Wayock. I'm the father of 3 Southern Lehigh students. I am a practicing physician and director of quality and safety for my department, and I'm running for school board this fall. At this and the last school board meeting, I heard physicians who I work with, and physicians who I respect lecture the community about the importance of mandatory mask wearing. I heard much fear and emotion. What I didn't hear in particular was data. I didn't hear any data whatsoever about the effectiveness of mask wearing in the community, let alone in the school. I also didn't hear any acknowledgement of potential risks of mask wearing in children, in schools, in education. As a physician, I practice evidence-based medicine. That means I follow the evidence, I follow the science. I don't follow just what is convenient for myself or my patients. I don't follow selective evidence or selective science, and I certainly don't follow political science. I take into account the best available evidence in order to synthesize the best available recommendations for my patients. To that end, I would like to briefly summarize the data the CDC, the AAP, and the health systems are using regarding mask effectiveness in the community. The first study is that of 2 symptomatic hairstylists in Springfield, Missouri, with 139 clients, 67. USS Theodore Roosevelt in Guam to 380 U.S. service members with self-reporting use of masks. There was 124 households in China that reported risk reduction with mask use. There's a study out of
Dr. Wayak, we're having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me okay?
You fade in and out.
Great.
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Great. Could I have a little bit more time?
We can add some more time back on.
Thank you. So there were 7 other studies that were quoted by the CDC which utilized surveys, some Facebook surveys, to estimate risk reduction with mandatory mask wearing in public places. These studies did suggest benefit. However, there was no intervention group. And certainly there were other mitigation factors which were implemented concurrently with mask use. As Dr. Rocher said earlier, it probably does work to some extent, especially for source control. The only randomized controlled trial, creme de la creme of data, was that of the Dan Mask 19 trial, which was published in March of this year. This trial specifically was designed to answer the question as to mask effectiveness in the general population. There were over 6,000 participants. There was no statistical significance. None of these studies, however, looked at the pediatric population. There was one study published by the CDC utilizing 169 elementary schools in Georgia. About half required masks and half didn't. There was no difference in COVID-19. The commonly cited study from North Carolina is not a peer-reviewed study. It's based upon computational modeling. In summary, the data on mask use in the community, especially in school, is far from clear with regard to efficacy, with some good data suggesting that there's no significant benefit to the addition of masks if you also do other mitigation techniques. Other mitigation techniques that are commonly used, such as distancing, hand hygiene, mask use by adults, and improved ventilation. Mask use by teachers and aides, as well as improved ventilation, had the most significant effect in that Georgia study. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next is Jennifer Wayock.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to defer my 3 minutes to Christopher.
Data on mask efficacy is only one side of the equation. What about the risks and harms from mask use? If this board is going to consider masking children, I ask that you please consider this. Risks, especially in the educational setting, which really should be the primary focus of this board, include, but are not limited to, impairment of verbal and nonverbal communication, the impairment of emotional signaling between a teacher and a student, a bonding between a teacher and a student. Positive emotions such as laughing and smiling are less recognizable. Negative emotions get amplified with mask use. This leads to increased anxiety and depression. It's not just emotional and psychological effects, although those alone should have you questioning any type of mask mandate. In a study from Germany of nearly 26,000 students, there were 17,854 health complaints submitted by parents when students were forced to wear a mask for 4.5 hours a day. 53% experienced headaches, 50% had difficulty concentrating, 37% experienced drowsiness or fatigue, 33% had sleep issues, 30% experienced shortness of breath, and 26% experienced dizziness. As a physician, I utilize facial covering every day, during every patient interaction and throughout my day. However, I get a break from the mask every 10 minutes or so, for many minutes at a time. I guarantee no healthcare worker outside of those who work in the operating room are required to wear a mask as long as is proposed for our students. I ask that the board compromise, allow frequent mask breaks. If you vote to mask our children for hours at a time, please allow them mask breaks. I'm talking every 15 minutes. Allow classes outside when able. Please think outside the box. Be reasonable. Be empathetic. Look at the data and make an educated decision. It is unconscionable to require children to wear a mask for hours at a time with minimal to no breaks throughout the day, especially in the context of questionable efficacy, and especially since our students and vaccinated teachers are at little to no risk of serious health issues. Let me repeat that. Children and vaccinated adults are at little to no risk. Please don't give in to the fear-mongering that is being propagated by the media. Please let our children have the best educational experience for them. Our most vulnerable population deserves better. As any pediatrician will tell you, children are not little adults. They don't spread this virus as readily, they don't react to this virus as readily, and they don't get as sick. They deserve to be treated differently. If you vote to mask our children, especially against parents' wishes, please acknowledge that you are doing so based upon questionable efficacy and real educational risks. We know that students benefit from in-person learning. As a primary goal of schools to educate students in the most effective way possible, it is imperative that schools minimize the need to quarantine students. Quarantine should only be utilized for those students who are sick. Therefore, I recommend you vote to adopt a modified quarantine process, such as those with students with low-risk exposures remain in school and receive the best education possible. Many school districts have adopted similar policies to minimize educational disruption. Please consider voting on such a policy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next.
Next is Jennifer Rovella, Dr. Jennifer Rovella. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening. I thank you all for the opportunity to speak openly tonight. I'm speaking as a mom of 3 Southern Lehigh school-age children, a physician, and a community member. I've been on the front lines in the ICU as a pulmonary and critical care physician for these past 18 months. I've led the ICU pandemic response for Lehigh Valley Health Network. We still have a non-biased virus circulating the globe, and we all watch it wreak havoc 18 months later. I take care of COVID patients who are in isolation in the ICU, only relying on iPads for FaceTime with family before their last unassisted breaths, before they're getting their breaths on a ventilator. And it's heartbreaking. I take care of those COVID patients in my pulmonary outpatient practice months after their COVID illness remaining on oxygen. We are still learning the long-term effects of COVID on both adults and children. My children are ages 9, 11, and 12, and only one of my children is vaccinated. My children supported me in speaking tonight because they want to stay in school, and they will readily wear their masks in order to protect others. We wear them to prevent saliva from unknowingly flying everywhere, and we appreciate the same respect from our community. I've seen masks work in multiple viral illness preventions. As looking back, not one case of influenza came into our ICU when we were masking. Never before have I seen that happen in my career. Anecdotally, and maybe we're one of the lucky ones, but not one person in my family came down with a respiratory illness last winter. And it's not solely due to masking. I know that it played a large part, but other things were at play. I don't want to see my kids back at home for virtual learning this year for any part of the school year. I don't want to see them have to quarantine. So to get to the end, we as a community need to wear our masks to prevent transmission. The degree of this pandemic will not be forever, but recovery will continue to remain much slower when all mitigation practices are not followed. So let's continue to follow the guidelines set forth by the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm still going to do my part. My children will still do their part. I support masking in school. Thank you kindly for the time to speak tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Roof, you're muted.
Sorry, just a reminder, we did have two people that we could not find them on the Zoom username. So Jessica LaPolling, Michael Malik, if we are on the last commenter, unless you email the account to clarify what your names are. The last commenter pending those two is David Dolan. You should be allowed to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Hello, my name is David Dolan, and I have 2 elementary-aged kids in the school district. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the board for their service to the community and for making this meeting more accessible to those who wish to participate. Second, I'd like to thank the board for their willingness to consider adjustments to the health and safety plan for the district as the situation changes and as new data becomes available. I'm heartened to hear from so many members of the community, many of whom are also members of the healthcare community, in support of taking steps to ensure that our children remain as safe as possible this upcoming school year. I think one thing that we have all agreed on is that the priority is to make sure that our students can go back to school in person 5 days a week and stay there. To that end, I'm hopeful that the board will vote for a plan that follows the most recent guidance of the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics that states that all individuals over the age of 2 wear masks in school regardless of vaccination status. This is a matter of public health where an individual's decisions affect not only themselves. As has been mentioned by several other community members, the Delta variant is more than 2 times more contagious. We should be taking an approach backed by science, data, and the input from experts in the relevant fields in order to keep our children as safe as possible, particularly those who may be unvaccinated, immunocompromised, or who otherwise cannot wear a mask. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope that you make a decision that will help to keep our kids in school as much and as safely as possible and adopt universal masking. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, my apologies. Our team here did miss one person who emailed at 7:07, and they did just clarify. So, Marcy Johnson, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Marcy Johnson, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, as well as a Liberty Bell and JPLIS parent. I'm here to speak in favor of mandatory masking for all, regardless of vaccination status, for the start of the 2021-22 school year. I know many medical professionals and others who have spoken here tonight have cited studies, provided statistics, and have spoken to the number of pediatric COVID cases that they are seeing in our local hospitals, and I'd like to thank you for that. Instead, I will focus my comments on my personal concerns and observed experiences regarding masking and other mitigation measures. In my experience in talking with many parents over the past year on varying sides of the mitigation tool of masking, I have found that it is indeed the parents who have strong opinions about not masking themselves or their children. It is not the children. Children, especially our younger children, generally follow what their parents model for them. The majority of children can comfortably wear a mask during the school day without any adverse effect to their mental, emotional, or physical health. There are many studies that show this. There are some exceptions, of course, some of which we've heard tonight, and those parents can pursue an exemption from mask wearing, which has always been a part of the health and safety plan. The remaining majority will just take masking in stride if it is presented to them in this way. In our house, we simply have normalized that for now we wear masks in indoor spaces, and our kids know that eventually this won't be necessary. My husband and I, who are vaccinated, have continued to mask indoors in solidarity with our children and to protect our children in case we were to become infected and transmit it to them. It's just what we do. It's not a big deal. Our kids simply put on the mask and we go about our business. They aren't being abused, being emotionally or socially stunted and aren't suffering any ill effects whatsoever from masking in this way. It's all about how it's presented to them. So the argument that this is bad for our children is really more this goes against the grain of the parents' beliefs about what masking means to them. It has little, if anything, to do with the science. Perhaps these kiddos have it harder when their parents are stating their views in this way. Since the layered mitigation efforts were so successful last year in our district, why not do what works? Let's not gamble with the question of maybe masks help or maybe they don't. It really seems to be a matter of logic that if a physical barrier is in place, masks, over everyone's mouth and nose, in addition to ventilation and distancing, the less likely it is that a virus can get into the body. The virus, if present, would be drastically diluted given all of these measures. Why not use our full arsenal of tools? I feel like I'm pleading here, and perhaps I am. We in my household have really been looking forward to the start of the school year, and I'd like to do so with a measure of peace. I'd like to know that I'm sending my kids into as safe a possible environment as we can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies, we did have a number of people in the spam folder of the email account, so we're going to work through those.
Somebody in there? Somebody come in?
Sorry. Next is Leonardo Claros. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Leonardo Claros, and I'm a physician at the St. Luke's Health Network. My wife and I have been members of this community for the past 12 years, and our two children go to the Southern Lehigh School. I'm speaking tonight not only as a physician, but as a very concerned parent. Getting our kids back to school is a priority. No one is arguing against that. But we must do it in a safe, reasonable, and logical way. Want to make sure everyone is clear on certain key points. There are over 70 peer-reviewed articles alone in the most recent review stating that the masks work. I will start a motion to debate in a hospital academic setting any other physician that thinks otherwise. More to come on that. Key points. This summer, the CDC issued a very important update based on their thorough review of a year's worth of national data about COVID-19 in schools during the pandemic. The CDC has now issued an exemption that P12 students are not required to quarantine after exposure in school if both they and the positive case were properly and consistently masked. This means that if in the unmasked scenario, one child in the classroom tests positive, pretty much everyone will be considered a close contact exposure for COVID-19, and all of them will need to quarantine and be tested 3 to 5 days after the exposure. Now, if the class followed proper masking procedures, only the student who tested positive will need to be isolated. As always, any students who are symptomatic will also stay home or quarantine. This exception to quarantine does not apply to employees unless they are fully vaccinated. Quarantine will also not be required post-exposure for individuals who are vaccinated or for those who had COVID-19 within the last 3 months. However, they should test 3 to 5 days after exposure, monitor their symptoms, and they must mask indoors for 14 days. Unmasked, unvaccinated exposures will require the standard 10-day quarantine with no COVID-19 test, or students and employees may choose to return after 7 days of quarantine with proof of negative PCR. No rapid test will be accepted. That should be done on day 5 or later. We all want the same thing. No disruptions, no canceled sports, no canceled recitals, no days of missed school. We all want our kids to thrive and be healthy. But if we don't require our kids to mask, we are doing a huge experiment with them. We are taking the most contagious viral variant, not letting them use masks, and crowding them together to see what happens. Not one single healthcare expert in the country thinks this is a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there more comments?
Next is Pialo Blanco. You should be able to unmute.
Paula Blanco. Thank you.
Sorry, my
Good
apologies.
evening. No problem. I'm a physician in the Lehigh Valley, but most importantly, I'm a mother of 2 great kids. I would first like to start and thank the board for the countless hours you have dedicated in helping our school navigate through one of the most difficult and unprecedented times that we have lived through. I'm reaching out to petition for the masks in school. I remember in spring of last year, when we were first dealing with this virus in the hospital, we were terrified to bring it to our home. We showered once we stepped through the door without kissing or hugging our children, afraid that we could get them sick. Now, 1 year later, we're still afraid. I'm thankful that my husband and I and my older daughter were able to get vaccinated, but my little guy is still too young. Multiple societies, including the CDC, AMA, AAP, all agree that masks decrease the transmission of the virus. The CDC recommended all teachers and students wear masks inside the classrooms, regardless of whether they are fully vaccinated or not. This updated recommendation reflects the rapid increase in infections, transmissions, and hospitalizations stemming from the spread of the Delta variant. Yes, it is true that it's less likely to develop severe disease or even symptoms in kids, but not entirely immune. Ask our pediatricians. Those kids will bring it home to an elderly parent, a frail grandparent, an immunocompromised relative or neighbor. This past week, over 20,000 kids were quarantined in Mississippi after 1 week of unmasked school. Several kids are extremely sick and dying in ICUs in Texas with similar situation. It isn't government's tyranny that is afflicting all children and increasingly younger adults. It's a virus for which we have vaccines and for which we can slow the spread with the simple wearing of masks and other precautions. We have lost sight of that sense of community and responsibility to others. This pandemic has just worn all of us, and as a healthcare provider, I'm tired. But I have faith that we will get through this together as a community and not as individuals. That is why I urge you to look at what is going on in other states and where school has already begun and learn from their mistakes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Gutman, Carrie Gutman, if you could respond to the email what your username is. We do not have your username. The next person is Livia Bradas Fontanez. You should be able. I'm sorry, Livia, you're using an older version of Zoom and I cannot, I think you should be able, I'm gonna bring you into the webinar and then take you out. You should be able to.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Ironically, I'm using my daughter's Southern Lehigh computer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I really wasn't going to speak. We had gathered a group of medical professionals to kind of get together and support, but I figured my input might be warranted, and I'll let you know why. I'm the parent of 4 Southern Lehigh students, all of whom are under the age of 12, and I'm very proud to be a Southern Lehigh parent. My kids have gotten the emotional, academic, physical support more than I could have ever asked for in this school district, and for that I'm very, very thankful. I'm also a pulmonary and critical care physician, which means I take care of intensive care patients. I've cared for hundreds of critically ill COVID patients in the past 18 months, many of whom progressed to need ventilators and many of whom unfortunately have died of COVID. I know, especially before my vaccine, that my mask protected me. Without it, I most likely would have gotten sick and perhaps even died caring for COVID patients every single day. I didn't get sick and I didn't die because I followed the CDC guidelines to protect myself day in and day out. Without masks, our kids may not get as sick as many of these adults did, and that's a very non-confident may. But what they surely will do is transmit the virus to adult members of our community, 40% of whom are still unvaccinated and vulnerable. The surge that we've been feeling over the past several weeks, and believe me, I've been in the ICU in the past several weeks, and we are surging again, as Dr. Pa.C.S. had said earlier in the meeting. Most of these patients now are in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and they're getting sick and they're dying on ventilators. In the beginning of the pandemic, I cared for countless grandparents who on their deathbed regretted having family outings like Thanksgiving and Christmas with their grandkids, whom were seemingly asymptomatic but ended up getting their grandparents sick. Now, certainly we don't blame these kids. I don't want to see this happen again. Now most of those grandparents are vaccinated. We know over 65 are almost all vaccinated in our community. So it's going to be the parents, it's going to be the moms and dads regretting our decisions here not to follow proven mitigation strategies like vaccines, masks, and social distancing. Please help care for and protect our kids and their families in our community so that I don't have to care for them in our ICUs. As a pulmonologist, I'll also add, as a board certified lung doctor, there's no decreased amount of oxygen that kids get wearing masks. There's no lung disservice that kids will get. In fact, we have pulmonary cripples that have been wearing masks for almost 2 years and can get out and about without dropping their oxygen levels. I just want to thank the board very much for sitting and taking all this time out of their personal day to listen to every last one of us. And I hope and I'm confident that you'll continue to serve our children well as you've done so far with my 4 kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Olivia, I'm going to remove you out to the attendees section. I apologize if we lose you. You might have to log back in.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Carrie Gutman. You should be able to speak once unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Dimming. I want to let you know I did hear you at the last school board meeting. I was paying attention. I heard what you said about the new superintendent coming in, about the right to know requests. And unfortunately, due to the current email that was sent out by the interim superintendent and the fact that this school board is actually unacceptable as far as we can't trust you. I trust Mr. Dimming for the most part, but the rest of you are completely untrustworthy. Watching your facial expressions during this entire meeting, Dr. Praya, I believe is the correct pronunciation, and correct me if I'm wrong, I apologize for that. You are so happy when a doctor from your group comes on, you get this wonderful smirk on your face. It's absolutely, undeniably toxic. This community needs people who we can trust. And you as a group are not it. The Delta variant is not being tested. Everybody's swabbing their noses. Everybody's doing I have COVID. Great. There's no reason for masks because nobody's testing the Delta variant. So we're just guessing at this. There is science and there is propaganda, and you're going by the propaganda. There is no science because kids can't mask properly. In a surgical setting, it is absolutely expected for the doctors to mask properly. You cannot mask properly if the masks don't fit. It actually says it on the box in my school bus that I have to give out to students who get on without masks. It's unconscionable. The vaccine is actually stopping the T cells from working. So this is all nonsense. Not only that, but the Zoom meeting is against the Sunshine Act. So it was never voted on in front of the public. This is all nonsense. So when you ask Mr. Dimming for us to ease up and be conscionable about the right to know requests, I'm sorry, you're going to get them in droves. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next person is Paul Tallarico. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to start off by thanking the board, the faculty, the staff of Southern Lehigh for your service to our community and to the students. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'll try to be brief. The circulating Delta variant it's really recommended that there are universal indoor masks in schools, regardless of vaccination status. Masks protect not the individual that is wearing them, but rather the people around you. By reducing the virus emitted in droplets and aerosol, the board has an obligation to protect and provide a safe environment for students, faculty, and staff during these difficult times. And therefore, I'm asking you, as the board, to vote in favor of a mask mandate until such time as community transmission has been reduced substantially. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Verify one last person. I do not believe they're here. The last person. Okay, the person. That is it. I believe that's all for the first round. There are a number of people who have already requested for a second round of public comment.